Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 135th New Social Environment. My name is Catherine, and I have the pleasure of being your MC today for a conversation between Gedi Sibony and Yasi Alipour. We're also thrilled to have the poet Jared Stanley here, who will read to close today's program. Before we begin, the Brooklyn Rail would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape, Canarsie, Shinnecock, and Munsee peoples. We acknowledge the many indigenous nations with ties to this land, and we recognize that Lenape still call Mannahatta home. Finally, the Brooklyn Rail stands in solidarity with the uprising unfolding across the country following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, David McAtee, James Scurlock, Jamel Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashard Brooks, Raya Milton, Dominique Remy Fells, and Toyin Salau, and in response to generations of structural violence against Black communities. Black Lives Matter, and we continue to support ongoing action in the struggle for racial justice. Before I introduce our host, we'd like to begin with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. And now to introduce today's host, Yasi Alipour is an Iranian artist, writer, and folder who lives in Brooklyn and wonders about paper, politics, and performance. She's a teacher at Columbia University and SVA and is currently a resident at the Sharp Polenta Studio program. Yasi, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Well, first of all, thank you for joining us today. This is going to be a complicated one to put in language, and I'm really excited about that. I'm going to do a very brief, boring intro of Gedi, going through the bio, and then I'm going to give a more personal intro, and then we're going to jump in. Gedi Sibony has been known for his use of salvaged material to explore the interplay between viewers, objects, and space. His practice moves between sculpture, painting, drawing, and in my head, language, and emphasizes on the experience of encountering objects in carefully choreographed spaces. His work has been in collections at MoMA, Guggenheim, Whitney, MoCA Chicago, MoCA LA, San Francisco Museum of Art. I can continue, the list continues. His current show, which is his 6th solo show with Greene Naftali, called the Terrace Theater, is opening this Thursday. I had the pleasure of seeing it this Saturday, and I could not recommend it enough. Nothing we'll show or discuss today can compare to just walking in there and seeing the work. As for my more personal intro to the work, it's been interesting spending some time really delving into Gedi's work and trying to gather my thoughts. And it was this specific moment on Saturday where my thoughts were rambling about the meaning of sculpture and what is it that we do, what is failure, and how do we recognize space. But also this frustration of like, there's a lot going around the world and I'm on a train heading to Chelsea once again, and what that means. And as I was going through all these questions and kind of taking this like familiar journey back to the galleries, there was this moment where I walked in, and I think, Gedi, I told you, I was like, your show fucked me up. And I think what was specific about it is that like, I spent a long time in the exhibition, and there was a moment where I was like sitting in a corner, I was like, damn, I had missed art. I'm not sure what that means, but hopefully today we'll get to delve into that. With that, thank you for accepting our invitation. Welcome to the Rail Talks, Gedi.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's so nice to have been talking to you and to see everybody settling into the Zoom grid. So let's talk about it.
or try.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to start with for me, this is the only way to actually start talking about your practice in general. There's this talk you gave, I think a while ago at Dia Beacon, thinking about Bruce Nauman. And at one point there, you read a quote that was from one of Zeno's famous paradoxes. So I'm quoting you, quoting him, probably quoting someone else. This is what the text was. If a thing moves, it moves either in the place where it is or in that where it is not. But it does not move in the place where it is, for if it is in it, it remains in it. Nor yet does it move in the place where it is not, for where a thing is not, there it can neither affect nor suffer anything. Therefore, nothing moves. There's so much there, but for me that really relates to how you negotiate with sculpture and your salvaged material. This sense of nothing ever moves, but also nothing ever arrives. We're always on the move. I was also thinking about how you engage with the empty space in your exhibitions. And more than that, I found this in one of your interviews, one of your recent interviews, where you were saying that I want to either have none of the agency or all of the agency, but not some of the agency. On that note, Malvika, can we start looking at the PowerPoint?
I think that's a good place to start. I mean, it's a fluctuation between none of the agency and all of the agency. And I think that what I was describing there is just that's the easy process. Mm. The quick road is to have something already exist, have none of the agency in its creation, and then have all of the agency by taking it. Mm. The part of some agency, which is what this show really is the work that takes years and is very frustrating and less preferable, but important too.
You know, it's interesting. I was spending a moment today thinking about what you chose from one of Zeno's paradoxes, and this idea of nothing moves if you think in that binary. And I've always been interested in like always dividing the distance in half and then never arriving. So somehow it feels like you're always on the move. And I do think that happens in your work. There's moments where it almost feels so effortless because like the object is just sitting there. But there's this magic of like how can it be this welcoming, or how can the line between the gallery space and the object can be like disappear like this. So it was interesting to hear you talk about like the frustration of producing it too.
You know, also at that time, researching for that Nauman talk, I all of the great subject matter is from Thomas McKeevely's book, The Shape of Ancient Thought, which is a great resource. And one of the other parts of that was all in the pre-Socratic era, I think, but that discourse is the long road to happiness, and through the daily practice of deeds is the short road, which, you know, in the process of making work and being involved in a studio practice, there's constantly a fight and a fluctuation between those two things. It's forcing a process that allows me to be completely in, you know, almost a repetitive action or a known set of actions, so that I don't have to confront the central issue, right? That's the what is this, you know, the center, what is the thing trying to make, you know, the challenge, I guess, primarily you would think it's filling the space in front of you somehow, so that the thing that's there reflects your experience, or can stand in for you, or to even be a, you know, interesting encounter. And so that means using, you know, the getting it into that space is sort of the challenge. I mean, the bigger challenge is that as an artist, we're all given, you know, if we're lucky, an empty room. So you have the empty room is the primary thing, but in the studio, you just have the reality that nothing changes without you. So what you have in the space, the you know, for me, the enactment of the relationship between all these objects is really involves moving through the space. I mean, you get the empty room, you get a beginning and an end. So for me, then it's how to make the room bigger, how to make the space vaster by, you know, carefully placing things in it, and then have more temporal benchmarks across the process, or something to you know, to keep it active, to keep it interesting.
The other day when I was at the gallery, I was like, this interview is going to be hard because I feel like you have such an intimate relationship with language, where there's moments where I'm like, oh, like, I don't know. I was thinking the word enactment feels really interesting in thinking about your practice. You talk a lot about the encounter, and there's something very specific, especially like in the way the hallway kind of introduces our way in this exhibition. It's interesting. I was thinking about the enactment and the studio and encounter and my experience with it. Yes, Malvika, thank you. That was the hallway I was thinking about. Something I was thinking about as I was putting the questions together in the same talk, as you were thinking about Naumann and the book, there was a moment where you were reading a quote by Wittgenstein. And you had this moment where you're like, sometimes you have to open a random page of Wittgenstein and like spend a year thinking about one paragraph. And I do think there's something actually quite important with that, because like just the intensity that Wittgenstein has in his relationship with language, almost this like obsessiveness of thinking through it. But there was also, what I found moving about it was the way you were trying to read his words. Because it's like at a point where language becomes fairly slippery. Like he's trying to think about what is not functioning about it. Like there's something specific about reading a paradox out loud. And for me, it was interesting trying to like read the quote you were quoting, because I think I still have your voice as I'm trying to read it, like the way you performed it. And then I was thinking about your relationship with material and with the way you put things together in relationship to this idea of coding, or like pausing on language. There are 3 verbs you use when you're discussing your work that I find to be fascinating. And I'm going to be a foreigner. I'm like, are they different? How are they different? You talk about enunciation, articulating, and reiterating. And I feel like those are different in your work, but all 3 are present. This is my weird way of saying, do you want to tell us about like how things come together?
Right. So the way they come together, going from just what I'm working on in the studio to how they fit into the space, that's a process. Having seen this configuration that was already in the gallery, you know, lent itself to what I thought was a kind of temple-like architecture. I mean, it's progressively increasing in size, 2 chambers with these side offshoot spaces. I cut the holes into the walls, the rectangles, because I was interested in the idea of not being able to get into that side space, not being able to light it, and also being forced to see it from a frontal position. That seemed like just an opportunity to explore that kind of area, you know, in relation to the architecture that was there. So it's a matter of things happening slowly in the studio over years, and then having certain situations that happen in the world that, you know, provide the guidelines for how those things have to be organized. I mean, in this case, of course, what we've gone through since the show was supposed to happen in May, so much of my attention towards reality, you know, involved monumental shifts culturally, and you know, and the loss that we've all experienced in some way. So, you know, having those organizing principles appear or being moved by images, and then sort of applying that to the decisions about how these works can contribute, or, you know, relay something about that.
It's there was a moment, so basically the way the exhibition works, like the 3 sections, and there's the outer ones where we can see the windows, and there's the central ones, and then 2 on either side. It's so funny trying to like describe the blueprint of this, because again, the work really refuses language. But there's a moment where, being on the outer hallway, you can see the wood and like how this wall is constructed, and you have carved through it. And that is like the leftover of the exhibition that was there before. Only now we live in a time where before is a different speed. And I think that has been in your work for a long time, kind of shifting our relationship to speed or time, where it's like there's a very specific kind of slowing down in the work. But it was interesting. What I didn't expect with this work, and was like pretty intense for me, was like, it felt haunting. There was like a sense of like devastation for me in this exhibition. I think in your earlier work, people talked a lot about humor, or the idea of failure, or as you put it sometimes, half jokes. And I think half jokes can be fairly tragic. But there was something about looking at the marks, like at the numbers that like are just on the plywood, like the measurements on the wall that was left from before, and imagining that our sense of like the pre-pandemic and this like longing for a post. For me, that was a specific part of this show. I have a lot to ask you about how light functions on this, but I'm gonna wait for a bit. Any thoughts on, like, teach me English, enunciating, articulating, and iterations?
Well, I mean, I think that part of the Zeno paradox, or even the process of finding meaning through language, is a grammatical process. So that, you know, language, in a sense, that you can use, you know, you're not talking about reality, I guess. You're talking about the description of reality that language provides. So in that sense, I think that if we can go to some of the later slides that show the tables on the outer area, I think that what I found when I was working this way was that I could repeat the process of creating an empty space that inhabited the space in front of me. And is this? And
I think
then,
the slides will move. I think they're in the process of, yeah. There. Gedi, I totally interrupted you, but you were saying.
Yeah, you can see them through the window there.
Mm-hmm.
But so perhaps you can just remind me the question.
So we were talking about grammar, and I think that's for me also.
Right. So to create this, I mean, the system of language is sort of like all the systems of nature in a way that it's a process of replicating itself and changing all the time. And the process of making those table sculptures felt like it was the same. The first 90% of the working was the same, to get the space to build the table and have the tools on it and to get the space, and then the last moments arranging the the stuff on the shelf. That was where the language or the additive process of putting all the pieces together makes meaning. The last step of it. I don't know if that's necessarily a language thing, but felt like a nature thing.
You're like, no big deal, nature thing. No, it was interesting because I think something I find really moving about your work is that for me, it feels really deeply about sculpture, deeply about drawing, and at the same time really relating to language too. And it's like, where is the meeting point of all of these as elements that like I tend to think about a lot in general. There was a moment going through these like through and this one is called the Terrace Theater, going through this piece and looking at the wall. So as I mentioned, on this plywood, you can find all these numbers, and there's all these details and tables, like everything that's similar, but also it's like you've drawn the wheels on some. Like the more we pay attention, the more things come through. It's like a nail that is not screwed in all the way. And then it's like, as I kept going through the show, it's like there's all these moments where it's like, I started noticing that in one of the pedestals, it had written like KO. And it was like the only time where I was like, this is literally language. It's not just measurement. And like this longing to decode it. But I was also thinking about the way you talked about grammar. It made me think about this old question of sculpture in relationship to different verbs. Like, what are your verbs in relating to sculpture? And there's like, I think what is really striking about your work is that the verbs seem pretty nuanced. Like I've never thought about like articulation as a verb for sculpture. You know, it's like, how do I articulate with the objects that are surrounding us? Right. And I guess like, yeah, go ahead.
I think that what you're picking up on, I guess for me, I think about it as a two-part process, where the first part of the process is to arrive at the thing. And then the second part of the process is to stage it properly so that it gets to have exactly what I sense from it in a magnified kind of way. So, you know, in that sense, I just jumped in there with that thought that I thought related to what you were saying.
No, I mean, that's the point. We're hoping that you jump in.
Right. I think that for these particular objects, it was for me, it was really an extremely liberating experience to finally end up with this form, because it's a kind of space that I had been struggling with for a while, to not be in the real world necessarily as a object similar to you one-on-one, but to to create a mini space. I mean, on a practical level, it was taking things that were taking up space and forming an empty space to use from them. So in a sense, that space didn't, you know, I felt like that space as a work table didn't exist, and the materials did, and they were scattered all over in the way. And now there's a place to focus rather than having to work every time with the space itself and to bounce the attention around the room. This was a place to take things out of being stuck, of being still on shelves against the wall. Shelves even as stuck structures. My impulse was to take everything away from being stuck and to make it movable and to make it the site, the available site for something to take place. I can now experience the possibility of, I don't know, creativity or something, because space is there to focus it, to contain it.
That's really interesting. In one of the conversations I had in the exhibition, someone used the word potential. Like, it feels like the sculptures are pausing in this moment where there is potential. I like thinking about the tables like that. It's almost like the scene of possibility. But like that might not be a bad segue to think about. I find it kind of moving. You often talk about your relationship with your father as someone who worked with construction. But in the same talk, there was this moment where you were like, it's interesting to think Wittgenstein being trained to be an engineer, or like Naumann's father being an engineer. And I just had this mini moment as someone else who has a father who's an engineer, which is like a weird thing. Engineer fathers are weird creatures. But the reason why I was thinking about it, when I was talking to you the other day, you were talking about like moving in space with your dad, or like going to someone's place. And it's like looking at how things function. It's like, oh, this is how it's holding up, or this is how this can be recreated, which is like something specific that I have, like that my dad does. But then, and I wrote to you about this the other day, but there was something specific that he used to do that was like this kind of intense, mysterious ritual for me as a kid, where he knew how to, like, how many centimeters each of his steps were. So he would like walk around a space to measure it. So we would enter space, and then my dad would just like pace around a space. And you were like, what is this magic? And walk away and being like, this is what the measurement is.
That really made me smile, because I had the same experience as a kid, that my dad would go into spaces and sometimes he would walk it and sometimes he would just look, and he'd know exactly what all the dimensions were and how high the ceilings were and how much space there was for this and this. And then he would mumble all the numbers in French because he learned math in French. And so it was just like such a strange process that this whole language of calculating was, you know, done in a completely foreign manner. So
that's so magical. Because yeah, the other day I was thinking about all the math jokes that I grew up with, but then I only know them in Farsi because I learned math in Farsi. So it's like there's no English math for me.
Oh my God, that's it.
The accent of math jokes. But there was a moment where I was sitting in a corner in the second room in the main hallway in the gallery. Well, because if you keep joining, like moving, there was going to be a point where I'll be like, oh, this one. Now you're moving fast. Next to this piece, like on the other side of this, there's like an empty corner, and it was just sitting there. And there was something specific about feeling like being in space with someone like my dad, where it's like I was both looking at all the details. You have this piece that is kind of a shelf, and it feels like you can feel the wood, you can feel the details, but it's so minimal, and you're like, how is this standing? But you feel like it can be utilized too. So it felt like I was looking at details with that intensity, but also that I could, that I could occupy the whole space in that way. It's like that ritual of like walking around it, and now there's something about like how this whole space is implicated. It felt like it was as much about the different pieces as being with the whole. It also made me think about your relationship with Nauman in general. And there was a time where you talked about, like, in your early work, you used to think about performance too. You were like, I had a phase where I was doing performance and videos because Nauman fits. Do you want to tell us about engineers and math jokes?
I think that I think spatially, or from a young age aspired to be able to calculate spatially what's possible in any given space. Like you said, I mean, since that was what adults did. And there is a mathematics, I think, in the thinking. There's the I think it's a mathematical thinking or relationships of I don't know, but I don't not exactly sure where to go with that one.
But that's also interesting because I think relation is an important word around your work. And I don't think we've touched upon it yet.
I mean, I think that for me, it's hard to pin down within the contradictions that exist even in my own working process. I'm very impatient and really kind of rush things as I'm working in the studio to get to something. And I always sort of skip necessary steps, so it makes it very frustrating. It takes me a really long time to make something. The piece that's up now on the left, the object with the square, I mean, the goal was simply to just inhabit the upper space of with as much volume as possible without it, with the least amount of structural support. And I think it's both because I want to I guess I feel like anything that's overbuilt feels a little bit awkward, so I'm looking for to make it as fine as I can, but to make it stable at the same time. So the contradiction is basically that I always want to rush through things, and that makes it take way longer. But
Malvika, can we go to the one before? This piece, right? The one at the center here.
One at the center, yeah. I mean, I think that one other clarifying element to all of this is just simply how renting a studio also means that you have to rent a dumpster and be responsible and pay for the removal of your garbage. I've never had or wanted to take that extra step because I'm sort of it requires a kind of like holistic view. So the trash that piles up, like I'm sure a lot of people try to get rid of their trash from their studio how they can, but it doesn't feel good to have it around. So, and the relationship between how it gets thinned out into the thinnest possible form, and given the space that you said around it, is living in this kind of not throwing things away, but also feeling that the emptiness is the preferred space of contemplation. Peace.
Contemplation is a good word. I read it in I was reading one of your interviews yesterday, and I was like, oh, I haven't thought about contemplation in a while, and it's a good word. It's a good word. No, but I was also thinking about perhaps what I'm trying to get at is like, sometimes I think about, and you mentioned this about language before, as like pure math as an imagined space. It's like, it's kind of a built up world as like pure abstraction. And then like the engineer as like the desire for utility, you know, to make things work. So it's like, perhaps that's what I'm thinking about, like this, like my dad and his interest in like making things work, and like, if this isn't functioning here, how do we make it function there? Which is something people talk about in your work, like thinking about the memories of your father, like bringing something from a site and like making it work at home. And then the other part of it is just like translating things to that like abstract space where there's like possibilities, where it's like completely purely imaginary. So it's like as much about utility as it's like, I don't know, there's something specific in the way your work does this. And like, I found that central piece to be one of the moving pieces in the work. Because like, I tend to, like, I read it as this like frame, there's something about brokenness within it and how it frames nothing. But then there's all these geometric forms that are in the corner, and there's this like playfulness about it. It feels like there's the possibility of movement, and then how these shapes like repeat in other places in the show. They're just basic forms. There's something, this is how I think about this. One time I was discussing a work with a sculptor friend, and I was like, this is my favorite piece in the world. And it was a simple drawing by Adnan. And he was like, no, Yasi, that's too simple. And I was like, but that's the point. That's the point. That's why it hurts. It's so simple. There's something about how your work does that. It was a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the simpler it is, the more challenging it is. And I think that part of the problem was that the challenge of the complete singular thing that encompassed everything was too stifling. I mean, that's how I sort of decided to be an artist, with this kind of idea that the one thing that could encompass everything is doable. You know, you just have to, the great artist can do it. So I think that giving up on that allowed for that to happen in the middle of a kind of constellation of different side moments that allude to the sort of missing powerful middle that encompasses everything. So
there's it's interesting. That's like that for me, that also relates. And I told you this with this specific show, it made me think a lot about Gordon Meta Clark in relationship to your work. First of all, because there are walls that are broken in, and there's the other things. Like, I know you've thought about light a lot in your work, but here it is really pronounced. Like, we have the first room where we have the natural light, like kind of pushing in, and then we have that like dramatic last room where we are mostly within the shadows. There's also something really intense about nothing in the work is about reflections. Like, kind of light travels through. And then there was the fact that it was interesting. I was moving through the gallery on Saturday, and I was like, whoa, I got here on the first date because the light is driving me nuts. Like, just like the intensity, the calmness, the beauty of the light. But I figured it's like, it's going to be that way every day. It's just going to be different based on what the day is. Yeah. But I was specifically thinking about Meta Clark's Pier 52, also because of the landscape that is right outside the window. And I know engaging with the architecture that you show your work in has been like it has always been like a deep part of your practice. But this one made me think about your work in relationship to landscapes, both as what surrounds it, but also what can be imagined, like the exhibition itself as a landscape. So yeah, any thoughts on Mata Clark?
I mean, I fell in love with all those images of Matta Clark in the house that he cut in half, and you know, through the hole in the building, and of course on the pier too. I mean, I thought that was, you know, such romantic daredevil moves to get into things and just cut them apart under, you know, the possible risk that the whole thing could, you know, fly apart while you're inside it. I mean, that's yeah. So I think that there, around that time, the idea of being an artist had a sort of daredevil component to it. I mean, Bastian Otter riding his bike off the edge of the canal has a, you know, that humble, and Nauman performing those little, I mean, that was in the beginning when I was really, you know, starting to gain steam. That was those, like you said before, those videos, those actions sort of, it was a way to sort of figure out what is the intention here in terms of how do you, you know, how am I trying to interact with the world in a way that brings awareness to what, you know, that's, and so those basic human questions were a nice place to start in thinking.
It was also interesting because I think that the first moment I thought about Matta Clark in this work is like, I was like, wait, what if there was silence in Matta Clark? Because I always think about the action in his work. But you know there's silence. Like all of it is so much about the light traveling through things. But that also made me think, and I wanted to ask you about this. I mentioned this before, but especially this show, it feels very haunting. And then there's, as you said, there's like the potential of things collapsing. For me, there's like the kind of the memory of ruins for me. Like, this is how I was thinking about it. It feels like something an explosion has happened, but I don't know if I'm in the quiet moment right before or right after. But there's something about how time has changed, how it's like everything is silent and I can be with it. It feels like an intense meditation. But yeah.
I think that's always been, I mean, for the most part, not using electric lights and having the kind of letting the air take on a kind of density, you know, has been part of it. But I mean, during the whole time that we were alone and you know, unable to be together, I'm thinking about all these spaces sort of just empty and waiting for us to come back. It felt more than ever that this feeling of creating the, you know, the ceremony around some kind of event, as the, you know, that was the, what is the event? It's the arrival of somebody to see it. I mean, so that's what a, you know, feeling like coming back after braving out into public spaces again. The imaginary part of the construction of the show, you know, there is a kind of wish thinking, in a sense, that the objects can be given the power to have the emotional presence, you know, through these careful balances, and when they do, you know, that's when they seem like good artwork. So
right.
I mean, the horrible part about having a studio practice and being the only one who goes there every day for, you know, decades. I'm sure this is a, you know, something that all artists face, but I develop a fantasy just that there's something other than complete lifelessness accompanying. And that's only a way to take away some of the pressure and responsibility to being the sole navigator, sole creator. And that's why a lot of the using used materials is really a way to not have to start at to not make zero the blank canvas or the freshly cut wood. I mean, why is that zero? Because it's not really. The, you know, trees have been cut down and processed and delivered, and that's not zero. You know, zeros for me was like, it's already got all this stuff on it, so I'll take my cues and make my life easier, because from zero isn't even zero.
It's interesting, right before today, and kind of as like a weird personal ritual, right before our conversation today, I was reading this text that is about ruins in Lebanon, which is like a very different take than the way we think about like Romanticism and like the European perspective on ruins. It's kind of a literal idea of what are the ghosts of a ruin. And I think that for me, that's the corner I was sitting in, by the way. the corner that we see was my spot. Whoever wants to see the show, that's my spot. No, but as I was there, it felt like the objects had their own history that was beyond yours and not known to me. But I think that's what was haunting for me. That they were in this awkward and fragile and intimate state right now, but that was just like kind of this in-between moment for them. And then all I could do is just like take part in this ritual, to like join them in that room. And it did feel childlike, but not in a simple way, you know? It didn't feel like there's a lot about playfulness in the on the tables. Like I thought a lot about playfulness in that way, but that room made me think about like the intensity of observing things as a child. Yeah, they're pretty haunting. And I don't think that's easy, because it's interesting. Part of me had the desire to understand what the materials are, and like, but also I didn't care. Or like to translate them into figures or like create narratives around them. But also they pushed against that.
I mean, if thinking about it like the process of a rational process of deduction, to say, you know, okay, so, you know, spirits haven't occupied these objects. Let's just say that's what we can rationally say, that, but more like something that we know, fear, expect, our expectations have manifest in the objects. So they, you know, if you were to think of them as being the source of themselves, you could say, yes, they're inert. But if you think of your perception of the situation as the force, or where does it, you know, how to reconcile that? It seems like the game of I don't know, some split that we have to decide about, you know, or some simple question about what's beyond, you know.
That's really interesting, because it was interesting. Some people, another word that comes around your work, and sometimes it's very descriptive, but it feels like there's a reason why it repeats, is the idea of the threshold. And like, what is that as a space? I was thinking about perhaps what I'm getting from the objects is that they have their own history, and that history is not known to me. And maybe this brings us all the way back, but when you were talking about expectation, I was thinking there's something quite intense about your play with like your expectation of the works. It makes me think about that, like wanting all the agency none of the agency by being stuck with like some of the agency while not desiring that.
Can I jump in and address that with
Yeah, definitely.
because it surprised me how difficult it was. The first table on the right, that was taking stuff that was already in my studio and basically flipping it upside down to make that work table, and taking 3 scraps right off the thing and sticking them right on, and it made itself. The whole time the intention was to make a work table until the last second when I threw the 3 scraps on it. And then to be able to make another one with the right 3 scraps on the right shelf, with the right length of shelf and the right this and that, was just a bit more difficult than I had predicted. So many, there wasn't one shape that I could cut knowing that it was going to go on that would look good on that to me. So I had to only use work that had pieces that had already been cut, already had paint on them, because there was no way to make it feel right. So what exactly, that's one of the age-old problems of manifesting. You can manifest the things that you're embarrassed by and want to negate them, and then you can be free from those things that you don't do the way that you want to do them by simply just solving it in a different way or something. And I imagine that's how a lot of people solve the problem of bumping into their limits. But it's just an interesting thing, because the only thing that I felt was discomfort until I felt total comfort. And working that way can be really satisfying if you can get there.
It's interesting. 2 words that you just used that kind of blew my mind was the idea of like the embarrassing moment within a process of making, or what it means to be embarrassed, but also the idea of problem solving, and then the act of repetition. It's so fascinating too, because like they're fairly awkward objects, but also very simple. So I had to kind of like wrap my head around like what draws me constantly back to them. And then how do I navigate my body within them? Because like, especially related to everything else, there's a specific kind of order with this one. This is a weird segue, but this summer you put this kind of a weird playlist together for the gallery. That was kind of titled like the Masterclass in Movement. Was that it?
Yes, that was
the Masterclass in Movement. And I do think in general, I think there's a lot that is related to performance and movement within your work, whether it is our body or your process or that in between. But the collection was for me very fascinating. There were like these very intimate and beautiful dance movements from Brazil. There was sports. Obviously, I don't know shit about sports. And then there was Kulthum singing, which was like a completely different. It kind of like just like shifted how I was thinking about movement completely. I mentioned this because for me, what came up with those, like the thought of desiring, what is improv? Like, what is the world of improv and how your work relates to sound and music, and how complicated that can be with the kind of material you deal with. So any thoughts on improv and movement?
Well, I just want to mention about that group of videos, the way that Kulthum, how did you pronounce her name?
I'm mispronouncing it in a Farsi way. You should not follow my lead.
Okay. Her movement is so subtle because she lets out this incredible love poem prayer, and then she makes just a simple, I don't know, little thing, and all of that emotion and whatever just is so, where all the other movement in that was phenomenal. These are the experts of flying and whatever. Yeah, so I think that personally, my experiences of a kind of freedom from set identity, body, all those things happen in these activities of movement. And there's something to the way that that happens in the studio, where knowing the steps that one takes, you know, you enter the mode that you've been driving for a while and don't know what happened. And then sometimes you, or at least I experience a kind of advancing faster than my predictability in a moment of that making. And when that happens, there's a kind of, you know, subtle split where the observer body is sort of remarking that the physical body is carrying out the task that the observer body noticed would be where we were going. And those are the moments of feeling, you know, that's the resolution. There's a confirmation that takes place when that happens, where I stop saying, oh, maybe it should be this, maybe it should be that, because of the impulse to preserve the memory of the complete, you know, only ending up at this possibility that I experienced in that moment. So I think that in the face of a kind of mind working problem of what do we know is real, what do we not know, what is sculpture, what is it supposed to do, does the earth rotate around the sun, or do they all rotate around a third point of, you know, whatever that's called in between, nothing's fixed. And yeah, that's what, I mean, that's what movement allows for not to get fixated by running thoughts of what things could be. And so the working process, I mean, is just always balancing and being aware of those things. And but I think that it's by moving through the show, maybe in combination with thinking about something, but maybe just being there is entirely fine. I don't know.
Fine is a fascinating word. I was like, I think it was more than fine. Yeah. I recommend being there. Just don't take my corner. No, it was interesting. When I saw Kulthum's video there, it just reminded me of a conversation I recently had with a Jewish Latin American friend, and we're talking about music and improv, and how thinking about the Middle Eastern and North African tradition of improv, how odd it is to try to translate it to language, to notation, to then improv, to think about like, how can two artists improv together, what it means to have that collaboration, and then that moment of, I think is a fascinating character because of that, because she's like the embodiment of like a love song, or like this political moment, or just like her subtle movement. And there was this moment of like seeing the audience losing their mind.
Yeah, I know.
They're like, whoa, shit, like that happened. And it was as subtle as that. But it was also interesting, especially in this work, it's interesting that like even the title of the show invites the idea of the theatrical, right? It's like, I was like, oh shit, we have like theater in the title. And for me, there's this like flirtation that the work does with narrative, but kind of lives beyond it. It's like, it's a push and pull. It made me desire narrative, but I also enjoyed not needing narrative at all. Or it was interesting the way sometimes you use the word choreographed around your work. And I think I mentioned this in my rambling thoughts yesterday. I keep wondering if from like thinking about music and improv to thinking about theater? Is there something about control within it, or the desire for control? Yeah, tell me about the title.
Well, the title was part, you know, one thing that had been operating in my studio for a long time was the white shelf that was in the dark room, the earlier images, the blank shelf. And I really
that was one of my favorite pieces.
Oh, thanks. I mean, for a while it was just the blank shelf, and then I thought, well, you know, you could be more generous and combine things together. But the tables then, with the shelf and having the objects on the shelf be the articulation of the table. You know, the table felt like that's the model scale for what's happening in the back room with the shelf. And then the terrace, the area by the windows felt like the terrace, of course. And, you know, at the time that I had, there was the early moments where we saw all the Italians on their balconies playing guitar for everybody. Felt like, you know, my experience of being in Brooklyn and for months at 7 o'clock every night, leaning out my window and clapping too, felt like I experienced this whole thing from a vantage point of above and on the street. So, I mean, yeah, the theatrical, the theater, the flat space, even the flat space of painting, the stage space, that's always been interesting, or something that's been going on in my work. And I felt like this was, you know, an opportunity to just be a little bit more overt about that. And,
Malvika, can we keep going through the images? Keep going. I'll yell, being like, this one. That one really blew my mind too, especially because it's facing the
rest of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
and just like that with the curtain, kind of. If we can go one back, Malvika, sorry. Yeah. There was also this like subtle relationship, because like we could enter this room, but the back room we couldn't enter. And there was something about access, or like even the act of like allowing yourself to go in. And then there are the spaces that were more private or disguised. Malvika, can we go through things? Because there's one piece I want to really just keep going. I think it's before all of this. So keep going the other way around. Looking for okay, keep going. This one, we found it. And this was in the back room. So this was one of the pieces where we had to see it through these carvings. But this one also felt, for me, it felt the most theatrical, because there was this moment where it felt like the objects could touch, but they weren't. It was interesting, somewhere in one of the conversations, Beckett came up too. And I was like, of course, like that makes sense with all of this.
Oh yeah, I know. I keep thinking about Waiting for Godot, but then I lose the connection. I mean, it just makes me feel that way, that play, I mean, the way that play is staged, a bunch of people in rags, you know, 3 people, was it? I mean, on an empty space with 2, right. Okay, thank you.
I think so.
I know, a pared down version of theater.
But also, I mean, it's interesting to feel inspired by theater, but having the people who inspire you be someone like Beckett, you know? Because there's something about how he deals with narrative or the refusal of it. It's interesting. I always think of, like, when I think about theater, I think about Brecht and Beckett. I'm like, those are not, they're very much it, but they're also not it. I was reading you respond to Waiting for Godot, and I was like, I have to tell you, there's a cafe in Tehran called Godot, so you can go and just be with Godot. It's very dumb, but that's where we used to hang out there.
He's in there?
Yeah, he's just like, I assume he's somewhere there. But I think this was the point where I felt like I both have the desire for narrative, but also none of it. There's like maybe the idea of narrative is what brings me in, but in the end, what I leave with is improv and the complexity and the simplicity of improv.
Like little sketched areas that are left as notes and then and walk away.
And then the other, Malvika, we're gonna do this again. If you wanna go all the way to the last image, I think.
I think that really goes back to the fact that you know, that the plan, whatever plan I could set, wouldn't be that much more interesting than, you know, any plan for me. I don't have but following the process, I mean, it's the improv process, but yeah.
I just remember there was this sentence you once used. You had this piece of writing. I'm trying to find the exact sentence. Oh my God, I have too many questions. Oh, you wrote a piece about Richard Archwager, and I appreciate how deeply you care about the artists you care about. And you were talking about this moment where he was giving you an award and he took a stage. And then like, this is your sentence. He said, rather, he helped the audience with a long pause. The room was silent. And for me, that could be the description of the whole show.
Archwager was such a wonderful man. I met him a couple times, and he just really was an art. He didn't have just look. He was looking, just looking and trying to encapsulate. Yeah.
But it takes like, I guess that's why I was thinking about all these improv artists. I feel like it takes a certain type of presence to be able to like take a stage and start with nothing, you know, to then produce. And then even like the specific words you use, this idea of like holding an audience with silence, and then the room being where the room being silent.
So what, I mean, that must happen to you too, with art. I mean, going to art and seeing something and makes you have to kind of hold your breath, bring your breath in. You can't believe that this thing exists somewhere. Here it is in a space. That's what good art does. I think slows you down, way down for a really short amount of time, but really slow.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I guess that was the answer. Maybe that's why I was having this moment of like, damn, I've missed art. On that note, I think this might not be a bad moment to pause and start the Q&A. Do you have any final thoughts before we go there?
No, let's see how it goes. I'm happy to take it in any other new direction now if we follow.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay, thank you so much. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and I just want to remind anyone if they want to ask anything, please drop it in the chat. Our first question comes from Leora. Leora, I will pass you a mic now.
Okay, I wanted to say that it's just a comment about like entering the spaces you create or you inhabit. It seems like it was for me like entering spaces never visited before in a way, like going to Alice in Wonderland. But at the same time, if I go on with the metaphor of Wonderland, it was like going inside in a deep tunnel to a space that something in me already knows and already have sensed, like a return. And my last comment is that it's not only the space that you create, but the charged, articulated spaces you create between the objects, like the conversation between them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was really wonderful. Beautifully said. Thank you.
Gedi, do you want to make any comments or?
I guess that that I just appreciate a comment like that so much, because I really do feel like I'm wasting so much time, and some weeks and months go by where nothing happens, and I really don't understand why. And then I don't know, just appreciate the comment.
Okay, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Tim. Tim, I will pass you a mic now.
Okay. I didn't know I was going to be reading the question myself. So I specifically positioned myself for this question. If anybody gets it.
I get it.
I had to run a flight of stairs just now. So Gedi, I'll just read what I wrote in here. You know, I'm remembering my first gallery visit with Carol Greene when she showed me your work for the first time. I don't know how many years ago it was, but I still vividly remember being there and standing in front of your work with her. And it was a scrap of carpet tacked to the wall. I could spend a couple minutes explaining what my reaction was to that, but I'll go past that. And today you talked about this idea of materials starting at zero, which I thought was really interesting, because how it relates to my question, and noting that that zero might be some point with these materials long before it reaches your studio, which I think is going to explain a lot of the issues that I had when I first was viewing your work, or at least that's the way I understood that explanation. So my question is, how do you determine when material has gotten far enough past zero that it's suitable to be called a Gedi Sibony work of art? For example, a cutout piece of a truck panel, or appropriated pictures reversed in their frames, which I know there's one they can show that's in the show now, I believe is one of those pieces.
That one's actually a painting that's been flipped around with patches over where the tears in the painting were, but same idea.
So how do you determine when it's ready to be called a work of art?
You know, there is only a moment for that to happen, and if it's missed, it's easily that it's often the case that it's no longer right. I mean, there's a moment, and the moment is right, and it has to be grabbed at that moment, or else it's got no chance. So that's just simply man hours or whatever, you know, over and over again until, I think. But I appreciate, yeah. It's hard to say what that moment is, but I've missed it a lot of times and regretted it. So it happens early, very early, earlier than you'd think, closer than you'd think. Miss it most of the time.
Well, I would think that
I often think about you know, in the 60s when they sent up a signal to aliens, it was some kind of basic drawing of a man and whatever. And I just think the scientists, you know, were sitting back in their seats as that message went out. And like 1 second later, the whales were all going berserk, but they were just toasting champagne, waiting until the aliens received it.
And so you're saying that like the messages they sent were so simple.
No, I'm saying we got whales here, you know. We don't know we don't talk to them. We can't communicate with them, and we want to find out about life on, I'm just saying, we can't, you know.
Okay. Well, if you were wondering where this ended up, now you know.
It's great. I love the wall color. It really helps.
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing about this piece was that it was shown at Greater New York PS1.
Yes.
I don't know how many, 10 years ago? Has it been that long, or was it just 5 years ago?
5 years ago.
5 years ago. And I still remember walking through that entire show and just feeling like this is incredible, like overload. It's too much. It's too big a show. There's too much stuff here. But there was that one room where Gedi's piece was, where everything sort of came to a stop and quieted down. And I walked backwards back through the whole show and ended up back in this room. And I called Carol from my cell phone and said, hey, this is the coolest thing in the show.
Thank you. It's nice to virtually meet you.
You too.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Annie Walker. Annie, I will pass you a mic now.
Hello. So my question is actually kind of the opposite, I guess, what was asked. How do you get in your zone? Like, what's the beginning point? How do you like do you light incense? Or you like, how is your vibe like starting off a new piece? Or I don't know. I guess for me, the hardest part is always starting. And
Yeah.
how do you get into your zone? How do you get in your vibe and what you want to give birth to?
The work of sweeping and putting away the day before all the materials and reorganizing and cleaning up takes up almost all of the studio time, all of the total studio time. So in a way, all I have to do is just start sweeping and organizing.
Wow.
And in that process, certain areas suddenly become open or have less things in them.
Wow.
So that the things that and I always take away the things that are the worst first, the most clearly either trash or can go somewhere else. And even making those tables that were in the show was a way to organize all of those things. So if I ever go to the studio thinking I'm going to make an artwork today, you know how hard that is. I can imagine from your question. The easier thing to do is how to make your area better.
Wow.
And then you have to then you can just sort of like jump out from that task for a minute and do an artwork and then get back to that. That's the primary task.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Annie.
Amazing, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Michelle. Michelle, I will pass you a mic now.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering how or if you try to preserve a sort of formal quality of an unpracticed hand as you continue to like master your artistic practice, because I find that the thing that I love about your work. So I hope that the question makes sense. Thank you.
That's a wonderful question. It really is the challenge. It's the unpracticed hand, and it's the unsolved. Well, it's the unpracticed hand, absolutely, but also the area of working to be undetermined means that I guess what you're asking is specifically, what are the strategies that that I use to stay unpracticed, or not to get into a habit of being perfecting a kind of craft. And I think that that I'm lucky because I was given the natural ability to have a low attention span, and that's sort of, I don't know, frustration and kind of, but it's the hardest thing. I mean, even at the best moments, you're hearing one voice saying, "Oh yeah, you're gonna do that artwork right now," and then at the same time, just, get that out of the picture and let me keep doing whatever and not have it be that. I mean, is that something that you also, I mean, are work towards? I think it's difficult, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have any tricks, but I appreciate the question very much. Thank you.
Oh.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself because of the Zoom protocol, but I definitely, as I get better at one aspect of my practice, I miss when I was bad at it. It's like I lose it and I have to get better at it, but I wish that I could find the sort of authenticity of when I first started it, or something. There's something to that. So I loved your response. Thank you.
Maybe that should be called the first time problem, or the first, you make an innovation, you find something new, it feels so good, it's perfect, and then you're like, oh, there's the escalator, I can do that again and get that same feeling. And what could happen is that, in the best case scenario, something else happens halfway through trying to redo it that throws you off and changes everything. So I think it's definitely the only thing we can do is do it again and hope. At least it's better than doing nothing. I mean, doing nothing gets nowhere.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Taylor. Taylor, I will pass you a mic now.
Hi, Gedi.
Hi, Taylor.
I have a question about the role of photography in a show like this. I'm a New Yorker and I'm really looking forward to seeing the show in person. But as I've started to venture out to galleries, I'm kind of newly conscious of what a privilege it is to be out and about, and that not everyone can be these days, and that we've all had to get used to seeing more and more art at a distance and kind of taking solace in installation photographs and sometimes just letting those be good enough. And I wonder how you feel about that, about how photographs can be adequate proxies for the work that you've made or the experience that you created, if indeed they can, or maybe just how you would like people to look at the photographs of the show, knowing that that's how so many people will see it?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I've often felt like they're two separate things. That when I'm doing a show, there's multiple jobs. One job is to get all the objects in place and take care of the show, and then the second job is to make a picture that represents some way that I had the intention of the show being seen, which is probably using the common points of the first view or whatever. But I do think that they're two completely different things, and I was wondering if video might be a better way to do it than photographs, especially at this moment. But I feel like so much of the practice from the beginning, I was interested in phenomenological experiences that I've had, in nature predominantly, that I wanted to make in physical space, so that that experience was a physical one. And I realized that a lot of, all of these gestures get translated into flat two-dimensional space, and now we're in this realm. So there's another thing there, the photograph. So that's fine. Now I get, it feels like two things. One is the real show, and the other is the images that last longer, maybe are circulated more, maybe give you an experience, but it's different, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Taylor. Our next question comes from our very own Malvika. Malvika, you should be able to activate your mic.
Here. Thank you so much, Yasi and Gedi. I've loved getting to look at this work, especially as I navigate in the slides. And I agree with what was said, that it reminds me so much of Beckett, especially like stagings of Beckett, like Act Without Words, and this sort of like, you really have this atmosphere of, or feeling of inventing the world and kind of imbuing meaning into like a sparseness. I guess this is tangential, but my question is kind of about objects, not in the work, but in your life that you need to get to the work. So my question is, what materials have been essential to your life as an artist? And that could be, I guess, material objects, people, intangibles, but sort of things, like what do you need to make the work, behind the work?
I guess people, I think, that both interacting with people and copying people and trying to be like people, I think that's a large part of it. In terms of the material itself, the space to have space, to have space to look at things with space around them. That's hugely important part of it. To have natural light that makes them look better. Yeah, I think that staying part of the community is the most important part, and splintering off into isolation is the biggest danger for my creative process. That's a struggle.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
What are the communities for you in this moment?
Well, I guess my family, my ex-wife and my kids are a huge source of help and motivation and discovery and brilliant innovation, and that's probably primary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our final questions and comments comes from our very own publisher, Fong Bui. Fong, you should be able to activate your mic.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Gedi. Thank you, Yasi, for a thoughtful conversation. And I just want to follow what Ms. Cher was asking you about the untrained hand. I mean, that definitely exists in most cases, very identified to your case. But I think from my own reading of your work, it takes a lot of editing. And I think it's more than not just the activation or the function of the untrained hand. It's really about editing. And it just immediately reminded me when Oscar Wilde, one was taking a break, walking around the block and ran into his neighbor. And she said, "Hello, Oscar. How are you?" I said, "I'm good. How was your day?" He say, very well. What did you do today? He said, I wrote. You wrote what? What did you write? He say, in the morning, I put a comma. In the afternoon, I took it out. You know, so I think editing is a huge part of your work, which people don't really, shouldn't take it for granted. It's just because of the thing look casual, it look futile, thing that you can pick out in very unexpected places. But my question is this, did you grow up speaking also French? You described your father speaking French.
I grew up in New York speaking English primarily. My father came to English as a 7th language, so that's why different things happened in different languages. So, but no, I predominantly speak English. I can speak English too.
But you have a sense of language, even though you don't quite speak it, just because everyone here seemed to talk about Beckett a lot. The reference Beckett brought up a few times here. And one thing we know about Beckett is that, you know, he wrote in English, being English written, I mean, novelist, poet. And then for a while, when he came to Paris, essentially became the assistant for Joyce in the I would say the late 20s, particular Finnegan Wake. So when he came back, that was which time he wrote in French, obviously. And when he wrote in French for a good 10 years or so, everything became more spare, more futile, more cerebral, so to speak. And then when he came back to Dublin, when the war ended in 45, he realized that he need to find a way to come under Joyce's influence. So where he acknowledged Joyce's work is about editing, it's adding. And he realized his position was to subtract, keep subtracting. And again, I mean, that's really about also a process, you know?
Yeah.
That's just my, you know, quick observation here. But my question is really simple, Gedi. What is your relation to time, you know, in terms of patina? Because every object you have found, whether in the trash can, a construction site and whatnot, these are things have already have a certain component of time. You know, it's been used, it's been utilized, deployed in some way or another. So in other words, I think rarely you use things that are fresh, you know, just out of manufacturally made. So there is a tension between time, the condition of time. So I just want to ask you that simple question.
I think that, first of all, I think that the subtraction process is a really important way to, just that point being brought up made me realize that there is a way that I can think about my process as a backwards process compared to the additive process. Subtracting so that the thing that was once the thing is still there. So that may be, I mean, the patina itself per se, I guess, isn't necessary, but it's maybe the same thing as the process of acting upon something. Or at least the question, let's say, in something as simple as the trailer, the sides of the trailer pieces that were cut off, which is more than patina, that's something being painted out, which I guess creates the patina. But the question is, in that sense and in other senses, are the marks or the relationship between fading or the things that have happened on this better than what I would have done to something and end up being better than what could have been made by me. So that's the interest in specific, what you're calling the patina, the interest in the actions having already taken place. I mean, I think part of your question also addressed something like nostalgia or something about the past. And I think that there is I don't know, and I think this could be just part of everybody growing up and getting older, but you know, the standard thing to think about when I was a kid and growing up, there was this sense that everything is improving. You know, the universe is expanding, but it's not happening that fast. So, you know, there's the life today is better than it was 10 years ago. And, you know, as I was growing up and learning that these things aren't really true necessarily, and certainly not true the way that they're presented to us, that something about the integrated life of one generation before me was, you know, in fact, the promise of this means that what was left behind, you know, becomes idealized. I think that's what nostalgia is for me. And I think that there's a kind of secret working process that, you know, these things that once were better than what's being made now. And I think that maybe has to do with a generational change or a loss. I mean, loss associated with something. Yeah, I feel it.
Back to you, Catherine. Thank you, you guys. This is terrific.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yasi and Gedi, for this really insightful conversation. So at the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our lunches with a poem, and we've carried that into these community events. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Jared Stanley to the stage. Jared Stanley is a poet from Northern California. Recent books of his include Ears and Shall. With Samir Farouk, he is the recipient of the 2020 Woodbury Poetry Room Creative Fellowship. He teaches poetry and creative writing at the University of Nevada, Reno, where he lives with his family. Jared, I will pass you a mic now.
Hi. It's really nice to be reading alongside folks who are so attuned to language. So that's quite a pleasure. And thanks to Yasi and Gedi for a great conversation. I'm just going to read a couple poems here. Appetite and Simple Forgetting. They were the last generation, and yet we were born. Mud covered the laces of a survivalist boat. The swan put its head in a drain pipe. This wind cracked our lips, and like the children we were, we kept on licking. It's probably simpler now that wind does things for us. Now we have all this time. See, the people who brought us here, what they said about the sunlight hitting the trees and the eclipse light they cupped in their hands through the leaves, it all sounded sincere, but what could it mean? We are alive. We make up games, gossip in the scrub and cheatgrass. The thorns nick our calves, it's fine. They mock our songs. It's easy to ignore the way air whistles over their teeth. I mean, nobody cares. They cry out about our dirty cuffs, complain of how fragile the dusk seems. Even on Tuesday, which is Tuesday, and will keep being Tuesday, and is dusk, and will not be too easy to smear or haul away, because it is not paint, it is not debris. We made some life in their heaps, fragments of a guitar tune. They never stopped talking. Things you wouldn't believe, swans and crystal, hymnals, how many kinds of cheese there were. So astonished and dead, flies in a billow of ash, and then suddenly we were no longer the stories they told themselves. The second poem is called Trinity Bellwoods. It's named for a park in Toronto. Meet me at the whitewashed gate, touching gray northern blues and thick jasmine. maybe the rain will start. And if the rain starts, meet me in any doorstep in your water-darkened linen. Wipe the tiny cup blossoms from the step. Sit down and look. Solid intimacy actually exists. Sit, stand, put your ear to the gate. The Queen Street truck exhaust is cloudy, an aide de memoire for my shape to try on. So I pass by at first, cough a little dust from the floor of a memory palace I'd been sweeping just then. A little bit sucked in, laughing at some picture hung askew in the lobby. By an accident of birth, I could arrive as rain in this air around a gate. Could see a tree as patient and waiting, an unfamiliar slop of green. This one, like the other one you've met before, off to the side, with my hand out like this. Don't I know your name? The disenchanting drizzle pooled in a vein on my wrist, hits the tip of the sun-faded visor of your cap. Don't you take my hand? I cough more dust from the floor, so we meet, or are under, the temperate green cream chestnut blooms, the ones that stick to a face, to the sidewalk and the gate, in a mystery, in an organism, in a letter, in a park, the air around a gate. Don't we laugh in it? Push out something less than air? At least there's no words and some breath, having matured into a mutual, smiling, majestic look, a light step and a hover over the other side of the fence. Two gentle but insistent captains of ooze spread over Trinity Bellwoods. Oh man, the jasmine really creamed the air, the sober, leafy, diffident air, as good a place as any to pop out of the earth the easy way, north. Say goodbye to a citizen, a thing that doesn't smell. Hello, jasmine. Hi, green cream scents. The pure must not smell like anything at all. At least that's not our hell. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jared, for those amazing poems. And thank you, Yasi and Gedi. And thank you everyone who tuned in today. Please join us for more poetry tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 6th installment of Radical Poetry Reading. Tomorrow will be curated by Erica Hunt, and the guest poets will be Samaya Bashir, Mahi Kim, Jenna Osman, Dior Stevens, and Yanni. I will drop that link in the chat, and you should be able to unmute yourselves and say goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gedi. Thank you, The Rail. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Malvika.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful. Very much.
Thank you, Yasi. Thank you, Gedi.
Yeah,
Really
thank you so
good.
much,
Thank you,
Gedi.
Gedi. This was amazing. Thank you,
you
Yasi.
all so much. Thank you.
Thank you for such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
wonderful
you.
afternoon.
Thank
Hi,
you, Jared,
Charlie.
for your poems.
Thanks, Gedi. Thanks, Jared.
Amazing
Very
poems,
wonderful.
Jared.
Thank you,
This
Jared.
event had a very gentle energy, like a very gentle atmosphere. It was very restorative.
Yeah.
It's that equinox
Thank you,
energy.
everyone.
I tried to interrupt it as much as possible. I was like,
But they explained a lot.
Very healing.
Thanks.
Yes.
oh, the present.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank
Did you know
you.
you were here?
Joe, Gedi.
Hi,
Have a
Michelle.
wonderful
Thanks,
afternoon.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.